Characteristics of life number 3. All living things are based on a universal genetic code, and that genetic code is DNA. DNA is the code for life. It is passed from one generation to the next. Now, we just talked about sexual reproduction. The sexual reproduction, that code that's passed is different from mom and from dad, so that's why the offspring are genetically unique. If we're talking about asexual reproduction, then that genetic code is going to be just like that of the parent, so the offspring will be identical to the parent. Now, when it comes to DNA, we will go through the traditional things that you go through with genetics is the Punnett squares. So we will look at the predictability of the passing of traits. So we'll do our Punnett squares like you've done in the past, but we're going to look a little bit more in depth. We'll do some analysis and we're going to go beyond simple Mendelian genetics. So we're going to go beyond something's dominant and something's recessive. So we're going to go past that. Then we'll get into the technical parts of DNA where we need to look at the structure of DNA itself, what it's made of, how you make copies of it, and then something called RNA transcription, and then something called translation, which is the process of taking this genetic code and translating it into protein. So basically, how it makes our traits. So it is a code. It's kind of an instructional manual, a recipe, however you want to think of it, that everything that we have, all of our characteristics that we have, comes from the code in your DNA. And we'll learn how to kind of work that code a little bit. Now, I have a link here for you to explore on genetic engineering. So we'll spend a little time um, with genetic engineering, which is some things that people would consider at one point in time science fiction, but it is science reality. So we could be talking about rice that's enriched with certain uh, vitamins, bananas that have been genetically altered to produce certain vaccines. We could see some glowing um, fish, and then a web spinning goat. So this goat would produce spider silk in its milk. So take a second or two and make sure that you look over that. Number 4, all organisms are able to grow and develop. So we once started out as a single-celled organism called a zygote. So we saw that already. Egg plus sperm makes that first cell, which is called a zygote. And Z-Y-G, refers to a union. So it's just that union of egg and sperm. And then that was us. And then very quickly, our cell started to divide or go through mitosis. And then there are all kinds of different developmental stages. So developmental biology itself can get pretty complicated. I don't have the developmental biology here for a human, but I do for frogs. You could see it goes through all kinds of different stages before we get to this adult form that we call a frog. Now, when you're talking about growth and development, it's not only an organism gaining mass or living material, we call that biomass. So we can see this picture of this development of this chicken that it's getting bigger, or the humans, it's getting bigger. But there are also developments that take place, and this is called differentiation. So when you're looking at the development of a frog or development of a human, you start to see some changes here to these clusters of cell. So portions of these clusters of cells are now called endoderm. So it's kind of like an inside skin, or an ectoderm, an outside skin. And then that ends up becoming different parts of the body. Not all cells are the same. Neurons that we saw earlier, nerve cells, are different from skin cells. They have different shapes and they have different functions. So developments are changes that occur as an organism matures, as it ages. And then there's a couple of questions that I'm going to have you think about when it comes to growth and development. Also, at the bottom of this screen, you're going to find a link to an exception to this growth and development. So it's a good read. I've seen this story that you're going to see about Brooke Greensburg. I've seen it before. Um, on Discovery Channel. Some of those channels, I've happened upon it a couple of times, but it's very interesting and it's also sad, but there are exceptions to this growth and development. Number five, all organisms need energy. So, energy is the ability to do work. So, work in organisms begins at the cellular level. And when we're talking about energy, we're talking about building and breaking down of molecules, storing and releasing energy. And collectively, those chemical processes, those chemical reactions fall under the umbrella of the word metabolism. And you've probably heard the word metabolism. By the time you get my age, some people say, oh, my metabolism is so slow, I can just look at a cheeseburger and gain 5 pounds. I can just sniff a chocolate nut sundae and gain 10 pounds. But metabolism are all of the chemical reactions dealing with this building up and this breaking down. Now, when it comes to energy, we've got a couple big sections in our book or in our pacing guide, however you want to refer to it, that we cover energy, photosynthesis, and cellular respiration. So, talking about conversion of energy from one form to the other, from solar energy to chemical energy, and then from chemical energy to realized energy or usable energy in the form of ATP. Some organisms are considered producers because they make their own food. Some organisms are called consumers because they can't make their own food. They have to get it from another source. And when we're talking about food here, we're not talking about a cheeseburger. We're talking about a particular carbohydrate called glucose. That's what's in our food that helps us make energy. And the energy that I'm using to talk right now, it's not sugar, it's not glucose itself, it's something called ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and that is made from glucose. So we'll spend some time on this. Now, where we get the sources of our food, we get that from our environment, our surroundings. And since we're consumers, we eat, we get it from consuming other organisms. So we'll also talk about the flow of energy in food chains, food webs, and ecological pyramids. Now, I have something for you to do, a little exercise, and we'll do more with this when we do get to our energy chapter, which is chapter 4. And sometimes I don't really go by chapters, I just kind of go by topics that go with the flow of how things work out. But we will talk a little bit about energy in our food and what type of foods do we like to eat and what are we potentially bringing into our bodies in terms of macros or macromolecules, carbs, lipids, and proteins. So there's a little link at the bottom talking about energy in my food. And we'll go over this again when we get to it, like I said, but just kind of starting to look at labels. So I've got 3 labels for you to look at here and then to answer some questions. Um, excuse me, it's not COVID, by the way, it's allergies. We've got ketchup. Yum. I'm one of those people, um, I'll put ketchup on my ketchup. Mm. Honey Nut Cheerios. Love Cheerios. Not the Honey Nuts, but this is the example I found. And the Pop Tart. Who doesn't love Pop Tarts? I don't like strawberry Pop Tarts personally because I'm allergic to strawberry and I don't want to die from eating sweets. So if you'll kind of look at these and compare them on your note sheet. Moving on to number 6, there's a video, and this is one of my faves, on responding to the environment. So this would be a good place to pause, me speaking, and then go to your own slide presentation and click and watch this video, and then come back to me. Okay, so you're back to me. So all organisms have to be able to respond to their environment. So anything that we have to respond to is called a stimulus. Now, stimulus is singular, the word stimuli is plural. So we can detect stimuli from outside of our bodies, temperature change, lighting change. We can detect stimuli from inside of our body. Maybe I went to the grocery store and had a sample of food, which I'm not really doing that right now, but I had a sample of food and I didn't wash my hands before, and I introduced a foreign bacteria into my body. That is a stimulus. And whatever we do in response to that is called a reaction. So that's our response, is our reaction, or reaction is a response. Now, what I put here on the PowerPoint, and you'll see more of these in the video, are three things we don't think about when we are in one of these situations where there is a stimulus. So, vasodilation and vasoconstriction. I was just reading an article the other day about migraines too, and they were talking about um, vasoconstriction and vasodilation. But vaso, that refers to vessels. So we're talking about blood vessels. So if I'm hot, then my blood vessels are going to do more of this. They're going to dilate so that I can have this extra blood flow near the surface of my skin, and I'm going to get rid of extra heat, which is a good thing. Vasoconstriction, if I'm cold, they're going to constrict and they're going to keep those blood vessels in so I can conserve heat. Standing hair on the ends. Now, not so much for us, we don't notice this, but if you scare a cat, my neighbors have cats, they roam the neighborhood. The little kittens don't know how to react to my little yapping miniature schnauzer. It weighs 9 pounds, but he thinks he's like Bigfoot and he can destroy everything. The little kittens, they kind of bow up and the hair stands up and they're saying, I'm big, buddy, I'm bad, and you better not mess with me. Um, and then our pupils here and that dilation, them getting bigger, and that's just allowing more light for us to see danger. So again, make sure you look at this video and answer any questions on your note sheet. Maintaining